guys, it's Kelly Lativola here, and welcome back to another What Would Kelly Make? From the parcels that I had to choose from this month, there were a lot of really awesome options, but I ended up going with the Birch Press Design Watercolor Wildflowers Stamps and Dies. There's no black on this card, so it's a little different for me, but I really like the way that it turned out, especially since I am hoping and praying for spring right around the corner. So first things first, I actually went out and bought some tape, and I taped down my Canson watercolor paper to a board and picked out a bunch of distress ink colors. This is not a new technique, the stamping with distress inks to get a watercolor look, but what you want to do is you want to ink up your stamp with whatever your distress ink is, and I've only ever done this with distress inks because they work with water, and then you just want to spritz it a couple of times. But depending upon how watercolor you want it to be is how much or how little you want to spritz it. I sprayed mine about 4 times because I wanted it to be really watercolor. The look that I was going for was kind of creating a soft, pretty watercolor flower background and then die cutting more concrete, more concrete images in the die cuts. So cutting those out and having them be more detailed and on the top, but I wanted it to look like a really full bouquet, and doing this watercolor stamping in the background is going to give me something that's just a little bit more subtle. So I'm just going through and stamping the colors. The other thing that's really cool about doing this technique is it allows you to mix the colors on your stamp. So here I'm doing mowed lawn and peacock feathers. Now if I tried to stamp this without spritzing it at all, there would be a very clear line where each color started. But because I sprayed it with the water, they start to mix on the stamp, and then you get just like a really pretty blue into green effect. And you could do this even with the flowers. I didn't, but that's totally an option. So I'm just going to keep going through. I chose large leaves, small leaves, large flowers, small flowers, just to kind of build up this bouquet on more the right hand side of my card. So the other thing that I wanted to say about the taping down of your project, I had done a couple recently because I was just too lazy to go out and buy the tape. But the board I have in the background is actually just the back of my watercolor paper pad, and then I just cut them in half. And then when they get paint on them or they get old or weird, I can just pitch them, and I didn't spend any more money on them. So I wanted more of a little bit more of a watercolor look than what I got. I wanted the colors to blend a little bit more. So I'm just spraying the paper really lightly with the just the clean clear water. But just make sure you heat set that once you get it to the point that you want it at, because otherwise the paper will just keep moving, or the water will just keep moving, and it can get a little bit muddy. So here I've picked out some Simon Says Stamp inks that match the distress inks that I had picked. And I'm just going to do some really just quick and simple stamping. These are just such great inks. They give really great coverage. So I used Hollyhock, Duckling, Spring Rain, Jelly Bean, and Melon. Now you'll see that there is a smaller one stamped there. That's in Teeny Bikini, which I totally love. But turns out there isn't a die for that flower, which is fine. It's no big deal. You can just kind of ignore that one. So because I can't ever leave anything alone and I have to add shading to everything, I just picked out a couple of Copics that matched the color inks that I used, and I'm just going to add some really quick and simple shading. I'm just going to use the tip of my marker. I'm going to do some light feathering motions. You can see I started with my darkest color. My lightest color is actually going to be the ink that I stamped with. So this is just something that'll give you a little bit of dimension to kind of take those die cuts to the next level. The only thing that I will tell you is because most die cuts leave that white border, just be careful that you're kind of staying in the lines. You don't want anything to be just hanging out and have kind of an uneven edge. So this is all going to be the same. I'll show you another one with this yellow. All of the supplies will be linked at Simon Says Stamp, so if you're wondering about which color I use to color what, all of them are always over there. And again, just using that flicking motion, starting with my darkest color, going out to the lightest, blending everything out. For the leaves, I wanted to show you that I kind of have a tendency to color my leaves 2 different ways. The first one that I have a tendency to do is coloring one side of the leaf darker than the other. This just gives it just a little bit of dimension. One side is more highlighted. I'm still using those same flicking motions, still very light hand, but it just kind of gives that just something that's a little bit different. The other way that I like to color my leaves, and I'll show you here with the blue-green ones, is I like to add a little bit of shading from the top and the bottom. This works really well to give them a more round appearance. And then once I had all of my coloring done, I went ahead and laid my dies in place, put them or held them in place with some washi tape and ran them through my Big Shot. Now here I have all my pieces parts. I have my background, which is completely dry. And before I started the filming back up again, I kind of toyed around with how I wanted to do my placement. So a lot of times as card makers, we're looking for something that's interesting, that is maybe has some texture, has something that kind of sets our card apart. And one of the great ways to do that, especially when you're doing a bouquet, is varying your layers. So here I've laid out all my flowers. I've taken a picture with my phone. You can see it on the left-hand side there, so I kind of know where everything's going to go. And I'm going to glue some of my flowers flat. My phone does not like me. Every time I touch it, it changes to something else. But so I'm going to glue some of the stems, some of the flowers, some of the leaves flat. So I have my background, which is completely flat. Then I have the things I've glued on top, which is layer number 1. So I did toy around with this quite a bit. I tend to struggle with floral arrangements, but hey, that's just me. Maybe you don't have those problems. So one of the other things that you can do, which is kind of like a middle of the road, is you can pop up part of your die. So here, the top part of it, where it's going to be connected to the flower, is popped up, but the bottom is glued flat. So it kind of is rounded or kind of mounds out from the card, which I really like. And then once I have all that done, I'm going to start putting some in place that are completely popped up. So by the time all is said and done, I'm actually going to have 3 different layers: the flat background, the first one that I glued flat, and then the flowers that I popped up. And so the bouquet will have lots of dimension, it'll have lots of interest. And that's just something to keep in mind when you're creating your cards, that how you can make things more interesting for yourself. So now that I have all of the flowers in place, I'm going to go ahead and start working on my sentiment. This is the love set from Simon Says Stamp. That it also has the die, and then the stamp set is the same name. It's just love. And then I have some vellum that's also from Simon Says Stamp. And because this card is kind of so busy, but with a lot of bright colors, my tendency is always to go to black. And sometimes black is not the best option. So what I decided to do is I was going to heat emboss my sentiment on this vellum strip, but I wanted to make sure I got it in the right place. So you saw I kind of laid everything out on the card, and then I scooched it over onto the grid paper from Simon Says Stamp, and then I could see exactly, because I left my vellum in the same spot, I could see exactly where I wanted to stamp that. So I stamped in Versamark. I'm using Simon Says Stamp white embossing powder, and then I'm going to heat that. And you'll see that a couple of times you'll see me move my gun off to the right. I try not to put direct heat on it. Vellum warps really, really easily. So I had the gun running before I even put it to the paper to make sure it was good and hot. And then I'm just going to hit it with a blast, move it to the right, hit it with a blast, and just keep doing that until everything is good and set. Rather than try to find a vellum adhesive that I liked, I'm just going to wrap this around like a banner, because then I don't have to worry about my adhesive showing. I know I'm going to like where it's sitting and what I can see. So I'm just going to wrap it around the back and just adhere it with some Scotch tape. You're not going to be able to see it anyway once I adhere it to the card base. So this is just a good way to keep your vellum in place without having to worry about those things peeking through, since vellum is see-through. I'm going to use some Tombow Mono multi-glue to just kind of dot some adhesive onto this intricate love die, which I think is so pretty. And then I'm going to adhere that so that it kind of hangs off the top of the vellum strip. I think it's easier to see on camera. It's kind of hard to see in the photos, but in real life it's totally legible, I promise. It felt like it just needed like a little bit of something. So of course I go to the shimmer first, because that's where it's at, folks. So I'm using Clear Wink of Stella to just hit up the ones that are die cut. And then I'm just going to add in a couple of white dots into the center of the flowers. It just adds a little bit of detail, a little bit of extra interest, and I really felt like the orange flowers kind of needed something in the middle. Then the sentiment seemed just kind of, I don't know, not full enough. So I've been in love with these clear droplets from Pretty Pink Posh for a minute now, and I knew that they would just look super cool on that clear vellum. I prefer to adhere mine with glossy accents because it doesn't cloud up the droplet, and it looks just really beautiful and super cool. So that's it for the card. I hope that you guys learned a little bit of something. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will catch you next month for the next video. Bye.